between the Association of State Democratic Executive Directors and the ASDC. And this particular webinar is going to be focused on executive directors and state party staff who are going to be executing really great 2014 plans. So again, welcome, and we will kick it off today with remarks from our chairman, Chairman Buckley. Chairman Buckley, can you hear us? Are you with us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for getting on here. The coordinated campaign is something that's been, in my lifetime, relatively new in the last 20 years. But it's really organized to share resources between the campaigns and utilize the state party as the vessel that can bring the candidates to victories. I look back 30, 40, 50 years ago where every candidate would have their own separate headquarters, would have their own separate Get Out the Vote program, would have their own separate staff. By combining all of these efforts, it has been able to save an enormous amount of money and win a lot of elections. There are really 10 things that, there's a lot of experts that are on here today. The lessons that I've learned over the last 20 years of my involvement with coordinated campaigns are really broken down to 10 specific things. First, the chair of the ED should always run the weekly coordinated campaign meetings. The chair of the ED needs to be very intimately involved in all of the decision-making of the coordinated campaign. Second, that doesn't mean that every single thing has to be discussed fully in front of every single person. You can have side meetings, and people shouldn't be afraid of that, because not everybody who's sitting at the table has the same interests that every one of your candidates have. 3, control the checkbook. Don't ever let some other entity or individual sign the checks. If the state chair or the ED is the check signers, continue that process, and no matter what anyone says or threats or anything like that, don't let somebody else write a check on your behalf, because you're legally responsible. Prohibit anyone from charging to the state party through the coordinated campaign. After the Clinton campaign in 1992, and this is, as you know, 21 years ago, the state party was stuck with $38,000 with outstanding bills because they were charged to the coordinated campaign. $38,000 was it was more than half of what our annual budget was back in the early 90s. It was an enormous amount of money and really crippled us as a state party going into 94. Second, be strong. The rule is that you're going to pay to play. If you're not willing to pay into the coordinated campaign, you're not part of the team, and you can't receive any of the benefits of being part of the coordinated campaign. And you're going to get a lot of crying, a lot of whining and moaning, and you have to be very, very strong to enforce that. 6, be very careful of PACs and committees who double or triple count the donations. You'll get a call from your governor, or, well, more often it's federal office. You'll get a call from your U.S. Senator's office and say, oh, great, you got a check for $5,000 coming from the, the gavel makers union. And then 24 hours later, you get a call from, each one of your members of Congress saying, oh, you've got a $5,000 check, because they will go and tell each person individually that they put $5,000 in the coordinator on their behalf. And so that everyone thinks it's their $5,000, and you end up in a heap of a mess with that. So be very, very careful of that. Number 7, retain personnel control, the hiring, the firing, making sure that it's a state party employee handbook, because legally they are state party employees, and engage in the exit interview process with every single one of them so that you've got records. There isn't a campaign that goes by where there isn't some sort of personnel issue that happens that we are held liable for one behavior or not of a coordinated campaign staffer. 8, if it's possible, work into the coordinated campaign budget the state party expenses for the final 3 to 6 months if you can, so that everything is all on there and the party doesn't have to raise its own individual money and everything go into the coordinated kitty. 9, retain ultimate control over the offices. There it is open warfare over there, or who's in charge of each office. And if the state party deems that the state party is in charge of the offices, and that you will serve as the referee between the various candidates, the local committees, and other entities. And 10, keep in mind that the old saying, the rising tide lifts all boats. You will get complaints that it says that the state party is doing this and doing that, because it'll say paid for by your state party on all these expenditures. And you just have to remind your candidates lower on the ballot that this is money that the candidates raised into the party for the coordinating campaign. And besides, the stronger they are, the stronger their campaign is, because it's paying for get out the votes and all sort of programs. So that's really my 10 things that I have as advice for anyone who's not been. And I look forward to listening to everyone else's advice as well. Thank you, Jonee, and thank you everyone for being on the call.
Thank you so much, Chairman Buckley. And I'll take a moment now to acknowledge that a lot of you who are joining the webinar in listen-only mode, but please feel free, if you have questions, to type them into the questions box using the link there on your GoToMeeting module, or you're welcome to raise your hand. We'll have some time for Q&A throughout the presentation, so please do feel free to do that if you have questions. Thank you again, Chairman Buckley. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a webinar that is targeted specifically toward executive directors and folks in the states who are or will be responsible for running great coordinated campaigns here in the upcoming year. And so without further ado, I want to turn it over to Jackson Ravens, who will kick us off with talking about coordinated campaigns in the states. Jackson?
Hi, thanks, Jonee. This is Jackson Ravens. I'm the Executive Director for the Washington State Democratic Party, and I've had the pleasure of serving in this position for about 10 years now, which is a good chunk of time. And as all of you know, coordinated campaigns are really important to moving the ball forward in so many different ways. And we're very fortunate today to have a couple of solid state party chairs joining us to talk about their thoughts and ideas related to planning for 2014 and coordinated campaigns. We have Dwight Pelz who's going to go first, the chair here of the Washington State Democratic Party, and he's going to be followed by Ben Grant, the fantastic chair of the Maine Democratic Party. And I encourage all of you, as Jonee said, to ask questions. I know you can type them onto your screen, but I would encourage you to raise your hand. It's always nice to hear people's voices on these calls and hear where they're from and what they have to say. So with that, let me introduce Dwight a little bit. Dwight is a fifth-generation Washingtonian, and for 15 years he worked as a community organizer for a variety of grassroots groups on a variety of social issues. He's got a fantastic background on grassroots organizing, and that really comes through in his leadership and work as our state party chair here. He was elected to the state senate in 1990 and then to the county council here in King County, where Seattle is located, in 1996, where he served for a couple of terms. He was elected as chair of the Washington State Democrats in 2006 and has been reelected several times, which makes him the third longest serving chair right now in the country. So without any further ado, Dwight, you should all be able to see on your screen the introductory slide to this PowerPoint. So, Dwight.
All right. I hope everybody can hear me, and just hit click this button.
Sorry about that. We've got a little. There we go.
All right. So we have been we've run about 4 of these cycles in my 8 years here, and we've been very successful with our coordinated campaigns. So I want to start by saying there, one way to look at this country is there's probably 6 tiers of states, and therefore there's really 6 different kinds of Democratic parties. There's small, medium, and large blue states and small, medium, and large red states. And if you're in a small red state, the scope of the operation that I'm talking about might seem distant and foreign and unreachable. And so I understand this is not a one-size-fits-all. Washington is a medium blue state, and if you're in a swing state, if you're Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, Obviously, in a presidential year, this whole conversation is moot because there's so much money being poured into those swing states. And I'm assuming there was no coordinated campaign in Ohio. Basically, it was the Obama operation. You know, and one of the ways of thinking about the coordinated campaign is that we take the volunteers who come in for the top of the ticket and we put them to use for all of the candidates. So we took the Obama volunteers and bring them into the coordinated campaign and put all that volunteer labor to work to benefit all the Democratic candidates up and down the ticket. And that's true, you know, in a year where you don't have a president on the ballot, but you might have a U.S. Senate. You take those volunteers and they benefit all the Democrats. And so obviously, if you're in Ohio in a presidential year, all those volunteers are walking in the front door because you're a swing state, and that is the coordinated campaign is the rising tide that lifts all boats. So, again, Washington is a medium blue state, and one of the things that we've actually been very successful on is that the Obama campaign actually in 8 and 12 didn't open an operation in Washington State, but they basically wrote a check to us, and the Obama operation was fully contained inside our coordinated campaign. They had a state director that was part of the operation, but they did not have an independent operation in Washington State. And of course, you know, it's hard to get the presidential campaign to put much money into a small red state or even a medium red state, and so that's why some of these lessons are not true for every state. Okay, so the most important decision that you're going to make is going to be hiring your coordinated campaign director. These are the 5 that we have, including the very famous Paul Tooze on the left, who ran our campaign in 2000, and Mary Grace Galston, who ran it in 2006. And
Sorry about this.
what is that?
Oh, I'm going to do that. All right.
Okay. All right. And then you may know Michael King, Rory Steele, and Timothy Anderson, but we had really fabulous people running the coordinated campaign, and that's the real key to the thing. And I have to say that this is the most important person that I hire. The coordinated campaign director runs the coordinated campaign. Actually, Jackson and I do not go to coordinated campaign meetings very often because it's an operation that we delegate to this person, and then they put together a fantastic staff. So, coordinated campaign director, your new director should have worked on previous coordinated campaigns but not managed one in a similar size state. Preferably, you are hiring a top deputy in a previous coordinated campaign or the manager of a previous coordinated campaign in a smaller red state who wants to move up to a larger or blue state. If they want to do the same job a second time, don't hire them. They are either an idiot, burned out, or unemployable. You know, in politics, and particularly in campaigns, we hire people and we exploit them at the beginning because they don't know what they're doing, or they exploit us in the beginning because they don't know what they're doing, but at the end we're exploiting them because they've gotten so good at their job. And people in campaigns that have value move through campaigns and then they move on and do something more challenging the next year. And I literally would not hire a person to do a coordinated campaign twice in a row because I really do think they'd probably be burned out. So one of the most important and critical issues here is that your coordinated campaign director has to be intelligent enough to understand McCain-Feingold and your state election financing laws. You know, we have had years where we've literally had the luxury of hiring our coordinated campaign director 18 months, 20 months before the election. They get on our staff, they get involved with the organization, they get to know the players, but most importantly, they're spending that first 6 months learning campaign finance law. It is so critical that your coordinated campaign director can be over there making calls about what kind of money you can spend on what kind of mailer, and that they understand the budget that you've put together. And we tend to have a finance director inside the coordinated campaign and a finance director remaining at the state party. and there's checks and balances on people. But I can't emphasize enough how critical it is that your coordinated campaign director and his or her CFO understand campaign finance law, because it just comes up at every turn. You should hire a coordinated campaign person, not a candidate campaign person. It's really my experience that coordinated campaign people do not know how to run a candidate campaign, and candidate campaign people do not know how to run a coordinated campaign. Coordinated campaign is like the Marine Corps of campaigns. It's about repetition. It's about numbers. It's about building a hierarchy whereby you have a coordinated campaign director, field directors, and then your on-the-ground organizers who are new, invariably the first time they've ever run one of these operations. Candidate campaigns, the campaign manager for a candidate campaign, half of their job is to manage and nurse the psyche of the candidate. And coordinated campaign people don't really care about the psyche of their workers. They just get them to work. And I'm not saying they exploit people, but the people that they're supervising are under quotas, under numbers, and coordinated campaigns are about numbers, and candidate campaigns are about feelings. So, campaign planning.
Can I ask you one question,
Yeah,
on the campaign manager? So, if somebody comes in, if you're hiring a campaign manager, what would be like the first 3 questions you'd ask that person?
Coordinated campaign manager?
Yeah, they sit down at your desk.
Well, I want to see what their resume. I want to see what they did the last several cycles, because obviously, in a blue state, now in a small red state, you certainly aren't necessarily going to have the luxury of what we're talking about here, right? You might be looking for a warm body to run your coordinated campaign. But again, in a medium-sized blue state, a larger blue state, or if you're in a red state with a decent budget, I'm looking for someone who's obviously worked a few cycles and has worked probably 2 or more coordinated campaign cycles. Come in as an organizer. 2 years later, they were a field director somewhere else. 2 years later, they were deputy director, and today they want to run a coordinated campaign. And so I'm going to ask them, what's your experience? Second thing I'm going to ask them is, why do you want to do this job? And the third thing I'm going to ask them for probably is some references. But then I'm going to ask them, get a sense of whether I think they have the capacity to understand McCain-Feingold and money. So this is, if you're new to this, this is kind of a Bible right here, this screen that you're looking at about campaign planning. I'm sure this PowerPoint will be available to people who want it, but let's just take a quick look at what we got here. Well, how do you start? You start with your turnout goals, because coordinated campaigns are about GOTV. That is what we do in coordinated campaigns. We get out the vote. That is why our members of Congress invest in what we do. That's why our legislators invest in what we do. We do get out the vote. And so you have to figure out, take a look at some numbers, and we will here in a minute. But the first question is, what are your GOTV goals? And then what is your strategy and plan for meeting those goals? Then, second, what is your budget for financing that plan? How much is that plan going to cost? And at this point, you're just writing down, you've got your coordinated campaign director, you've got your finance director, you're just putting their salary in here. You've got your budget for your office. You're just putting in gross numbers for everything. But the second question then is you take that budget and what we call scoring the budget. You score that budget to see which of those functions you have to pay for with federal dollars and which of those functions you can pay for with state dollars. And my assumption is that we always have more state dollars than federal dollars. And so you're always trying to preserve your federal dollars and minimize your use of federal dollars and maximize your use of state dollars. And when we score our budget, in many years we bring Neil Reef out to Seattle to go through that exercise with us, and we certainly would have him on the phone for probably 6 or 8 hours of conversation. And Neil is taking a look at our budget and letting us know what parts of it we can pay for with state dollars. And in Washington State, we actually have state soft and state hard. On the federal level, you have federal, and then you have Levin. And so this is really critical because unfortunately we just don't have that much federal money to go around. And again, this is the real liability of a red state. You know, in Washington, we're a blue state. We've got a Democratic governor and 2 U.S. senators that are Democrats, and we've got 6 members of Congress that are Democrats. Those people buy into our program, and they buy into it with federal money. So, you know, we started last year. We had $700,000 from Senator Cantwell because she was up for office, and we go to these people and we say, you have to give us $500,000. That's considered our buy-in for a U.S. Senate or for a governor, is you have to put $500,000 into the coordinated campaign. And in this case, Maria put in not just $500,000, but she put in $700,000. Patty Murray raised $150,000 for us, even though she was not running. We asked each member of Congress to put in $100,000. We didn't quite get that much, but we got about an average of about $60,000. Yep. And we even had first-time candidates who put in $30,000 or $40,000. And Obama put in $700,000. Again, as I said, they decided to do their operation through the state party. So rather than them spending $700,000 to start a whole program out here, they gave us $700,000. And then our candidate for governor, Jay Inslee, was a congressman, and he actually, his buy-in was with surplus congressional dollars. So we started the year with about $2.5 million in federal money, which is a huge luxury, and one that you're not going to get in a red state because you don't have those candidates. And I really don't I don't have a lot of wisdom for you in a red state about how you go about financing your coordinated campaign, but the fact of the matter is you still have to score your budget for state and federal dollars. So now we go down to the 4th bullet, and now that we've scored the budget, now we ask ourselves how much federal money actually can we raise and how much state money can we raise, and we take a look at that. And that forces us to the 5th decision, which is what is our adjusted budget based on how much federal money we need and how much federal money we can raise and how much state money we can need and how much we can raise. So now you have a budget and a plan that has been scored for purposes of McCain-Feingold. Am I supposed to stop for questions here? I'm talking very fast.
Are we getting any questions yet? Jonay?
No, not yet.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so
Thank you.
I'm sorry I'm talking fast. I hope everybody can follow me. Okay, so now we take a look at this question of the campaign plan. Again, we're gonna send this to you, but I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, but it's somewhat explanatory. And this is a document that we shared with our allies, you know, candidates in the labor movement and other constituencies. So to sort of lay out to them how we go through our process. So you start with a voter projection, estimated voting age population, 5.3 million, estimated voter registration, 3.9, that's from the Secretary of State, estimated turnout, estimated goal is 160,000, so it's 52% of the turnout is what we want. That's our goal, is to get 52%. And we have a Democratic base vote of 1.38. So that leaves our vote deficit of 259,000. We think the campaign, the coordinated campaign, has to turn out 259,000 additional people through our GOTV efforts for us to be successful in the election. And so that matrix you begin with. So then the question is, what do we think turnout's going to be? And we do a historical analysis in that next chart of turnout in the past. That leads us to, we projected a statewide turnout of 81%. And so we build that into our strategy. 81% of 389,000 registered voters is 3,155,000 votes. We need to get to 52%, and so that leaves us with this turnout of 1,000,064. So this is a process that I'll leave you to read this, but it's pretty interesting. This is what Timothy did for us last year. Is he took these 6 buckets of votes total regular vote, Democratic regular vote, persuadable vote, and then the sporadic vote, and total sporadic vote, Democratic sporadic vote, persuadable sporadic vote. So these are these buckets that he's talking about, and you can take a little bit more of a look at that. But that's, it goes into these buckets, let's see. And you can see the numbers that he's hoping to pull from these various buckets. Again, this is part of his analysis. And so expected turnout, 3.1 million, votes needed to win, 1.64, Democratic base votes, 143. Again, we have this vote deficit up here. So, and then strategic goals based on the voter buckets, there's where you see where he comes up with a universe of about 400,000 people out of those different buckets. And that universe of 400,000 is the universe that we're going to work in order to get that vote deficit of 259,000 votes. And so literally, there are people in that universe that we are planning to hit 8 and 10 times, two times on the phone, 1 time at the door, and 5 times with mail, for example. But the coordinated campaign is focused on those 400,000 voters for the most part. We do some work to get out, you know, our base vote, but for the most part, we're assuming that the base vote's going to win, and we're really focusing on those 400,000 voters, because if we can turn these 259,000 votes, get them out to vote Democrat, that means that the field program of the coordinated campaign is securing victory for the top of the ticket. You know, we heavily employed micro-targeting in 2012. And what I say that, you know, across the country, there was a narrative that Obama knew who was going to vote and Romney didn't. The whole story of Karl Rove going ballistic on election night because Ohio was called for Obama, and his people said that he was going to win Ohio, but we knew we were going to win Ohio. We had the same thing happen in Washington State. We knew who was going to vote on the governor's race, which was our big race in 2012, and the Republicans did not know who was going to vote. And we had a model on voters, and we spent about $300,000 to develop this model. And it's not cheap, but it gave us a very good idea of who was going to vote. I think it was about, well, we have a very unique system in Washington, which is we're all mail balloting. We have no polls. So ballots go out about 3 weeks before the election, and every time somebody votes, you're going to be jealous of this, but every time somebody votes, the auditor lets us know that they've received a ballot from that person, and we stop turning them out to vote. So we've got this rolling 21 days where we tell people, if you're tired of us calling you on the phone, just vote and we'll stop calling you, right? Because we find out when people have voted. So we tested this model 10 days out. We called, I think, about 5,000 people who had already voted in the governor's race. We did a robo-poll and said, you know, press 1 if you voted for Jay Inslee, the Democrat, press 2 if you voted for Rob McKenna, the Republican. We had a prediction. What micro-targeting does is it gives you a theory about every voter in the state. You know, so with micro-targeting, we went from the point where we had information on about 50% of the people that we laboriously collected over the years through IDs. And in past cycles, we thought we had information on about half the people. And with micro-targeting, you have information on everybody. And so when we did these 5,000 people that already voted in the governor's race, we thought we knew who these people were, and we thought we knew how they were going to vote. We projected what the result of this robo-poll was going to be before the robo-poll came back, and we were spot on. And let me say, on election night, my guy came to me and said, Jay Inslee, the candidate for governor, is going to get 51.3 tonight, and he got 51.32. So this micro-targeting is definitely the future. It's obviously you're not going to be able to afford it in a small or medium red state, but you really need to be moving in this direction, because it gives you a theory about every voter in the state. And then this is just a calendar for different phases of the field program. So this campaign budget you see is somewhat of a scored budget. The campaign director, you can pay 27 plus 49 is about $78,000. Neil, through our exercise of scoring the budget, we figure that we can actually pay that person $27,000 with state money and $49,000, $27,000 with federal and $49,000 with state. You know, so again, we're trying to maximize our use of state dollars, and so you really want to find all the possible ways to pay with state dollars, and a lot of this has to do with before the window opens. You can, before the elections window, 3 months before the election, you can use state dollars for various functions. And then we even have a side there for Levin, which, as you know, Levin money is state money that can be spent for federal purposes. So that's kind of what scoring looks like and why it's so important. This is something that I think is relevant for every state. This is the most important thing that Jackson and I have accomplished in the last 8 years, which is we set goals for, you can see on the bottom left, those are unions. On the top, you have your members of Congress. And we go to them and we tell them how much is expected. So in 2012, you've got, that's a little odd, the target for the governor was 500,000. So anyway, so just to let you know, the target for the governor was 500,000, and the target for the other senator who was up was 500,000. And then we estimate what pots of money that's going to come from. Again, this is that exercise of scoring your income. This is where you score your income, and you figure out how much of that money is going to be federal, non-exempt. Well, non-exempt and exempt are terms for our state dollars, and then Levin. So you've got how much, and obviously your members of Congress, they're all the donations are federal. Your unions, all their donations tend to be state donations, as you can see. And then from the unions and organizations, you're getting your $10,000 Levin amounts of money. And then we've got, you can see the last column there is 2010 target and 2010 received. We write this plan and we publicize this plan and we send this plan to everybody and we send it out updated every couple months, and everybody looks and sees whether they're coming through with their amount of money, and if they're not, they're under pressure from their colleagues. We hold all of these players accountable for donating this money, and this has become so effective that this year we had a fundraiser in early February this year before I put this sheet out on the street for 2013, because we do a sheet in 2013 even though it's not an election year. I call this the sheet. We do this ask every year even if there's not an election. And we had a fundraiser in February, and I had 3 unions call me up and say, well, look, Dwight, this is great. You want us to write a check for the fundraiser, but my question is, how much are you asking me for this year? So before we even put this chart on the street, I had unions calling me and saying, what do I have to give you this year? $50,000? I'm trying to do my budget, so tell me what my dues are. And obviously, this is a great victory for a state party to have all of these allies feel that they should be donating to you in an election year, in a non-election year. I have told these people that the Democratic Party is a co-op and you own it. These are the people that own the cooperative called the State Democratic Party, and they're very comfortable with this. And another thing about this is that when we have our annual events, we don't go to these people a second time and ask them for to buy a table, because that's already built into the ask, okay? And so, you know, the unions that are giving more might get 2 tables. The unions that are getting less might get 2 seats. But the reality is that when this is a unified budget, okay? This is the budget for the and the ask. This is the ask for both the coordinated campaign and the state party. We do not make a distinction any longer. We used to. We used to do fundraising for the party and then fundraising for the coordinated campaign. But the reality, as Ray said, is these people are all employees of the state party. And as I've told, you know, a reluctant congressman, there's no way in hell I'm not going to get paid, you know, just because the party side of the fundraising fell short of the coordinated campaign side of the fundraising. So this is an ask for paying for both the coordinated campaign and the state party, which again is one of our great victories. And that is the end of my presentation.
So in summary, basically it's competent professional staff right from the get-go and making sure they've got some solid background, having a tight, clear plan that has a very clear budget, and that really helps put everybody on message about what you're trying to accomplish, which is very important. And then subsequently, if you've got those two things down, you can really start creating a culture of buy-in, a culture of commitment, a culture of giving, and that message that the Democratic Party is a co-op and that all these people are members. So those three basic things make a huge difference as you go forward. So thanks, Dwight. Jonae, do we have any questions?
We don't currently have any questions. I believe we've noted this, but if folks would like to ask questions, please make sure that you use the raise your hand icon, and we will certainly unmute you, or you can type your questions in the questions box. We've had a lot of folks asking for the presentation as well as a copy of sample copy of your plan. So awesome presentation, guys.
We've already we sent the PowerPoint handouts and a copy of the campaign plan in a Word format to Jonae. So you should be getting those after this call. It should not be a problem. So with that, I'd like to introduce the second presenter that we have today, Chairman Ben Grant of the Maine Democratic Party. Ben's been in Maine for quite a while, where he works as a lawyer, and he concentrates his practice on workers' compensation, labor law, employment discrimination, wage and hour violations, and election law. And he's been recognized as by his peers as a super lawyer's rising star in the field of in New England in the field of workers' compensation. He's worked in state government and electoral politics as an aide to State Senate Presidents Beth Edmonds and Beverly Daggett. And he was elected chair of the Maine Democratic Party for the first time in late January of 2011. So Mary Aaron and Ben, would you be willing to share with us some of your wisdom and knowledge?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jackson. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Before I start, I was asked to, I'm sorry, Jonae, there's a bit of an echo here. Can you all hear me fine?
We've got you, Ben.
Okay. All right, so I was asked to focus my remarks on a small state. So, some of the things that I want to talk about are repetitive from the previous two speakers, but I'm going to try to tailor it to what goes on in a small blue state, which Maine is. So I'll just get right into it. I think we want to try to finish up by 5. So the first question that was given to me was, what's a process to prepare? So we don't view that there's any off year. We just move right from the last election into the next one without stopping. So the other thing is we really try to focus on the field program. There's a lot of other things that can distract you, from DC partners coming in, like the DGA, who want to spend a lot of money on ads and have other interests in your state. But you've got to really protect and focus in on the field program. Also in preparation, we try to really assess the capacity of our allies. So Dwight had up on the screen a list of all the unions and his expectations for how much money they would give to the Washington Coordinated. Well, in a small state, our unions are also sort of low on the totem pole within their own international organizations. So one of the things that I did when I first started this 3 years ago was to figure out what was the real capacity of our unions and our other allied partners. Because it's not always obvious, and it's not always as much as they want to tell us it is. The other thing is also very obvious, that's assessing electoral needs. We all know about the top of the ticket, but you can't forget that you're the Democratic Party as a whole. and you have responsibility to everyone up and down the ticket. And in particular, a lot of your funders are going to be involved for different reasons. You know, so we had a non-targeted U.S. Senate race in 2012, but no one really, even within the state, paid attention too much to it. What they really wanted to focus on was winning back the state legislature. Well, that involved a whole different kind of strategy built around state legislative districts. All stuff is pretty self-evident, but something you need to pay attention to from the very beginning, because it drives what donors want, it drives what all your other partners want out of the coordinated campaign. The other thing I would say, because it's a small state, is to very honestly solicit your volunteer organizations. In Maine, the key structure for us is county committees. Now, I don't know about other states, whether it's at the municipal level or town level, but for us it's the county committees. These people are the volunteers that really supply the phone calls and the door knocks, and I found it's very easy to get them to buy into what we want to do. If you're up front, if you get out front and solicit them from the very beginning. So that's sort of the preparation. That's some of the stuff that we do before we write a budget, before we design a voter contact program, before we even figure out what voters we want to contact. It's sort of an early assessment. Another thing I was asked to do is to say something specifically about chairs. I know there's a lot of, this is for executive directors, so it's a little bit relevant to you, but you know, I think you've got to figure out what your place is in the political scene in your state, and be honest about it. So what you heard from my background was that I actually came up through the staffing at the state legislative level. So I came in as the chair of the party through a different route, not as an elected official, but as a staffer who had been a member of a coordinated campaign running a legislative caucus. So that gave me some more credibility to go to our partners and elected officials and describe actual plans. I don't think everyone can do that, but you might have different strengths based on your background. And that informs how actively you should be involved in making the plans. So you heard Dwight and Jackson say they don't actually attend coordinated campaign meetings. They let their director do that. I actually run them myself because I know what's going on and I know all the players, and I have some level of credibility with all of them that I think benefits the whole table. The last thing for chairs is to include the major funders early. I like to try to include them in the planning process so they feel more bought in to what we're doing. Now, I think this works better in a small state where our core of major funders is fairly small. It can usually fit in one room. Clearly, that wouldn't apply to a big state like Washington or even bigger state. But I've gotten a lot of mileage out of sitting down with the funders early on, seeing what their priorities are, and explain to them how we view the pathway to win based on those priorities. The way we run our coordinate is fairly simple. We have a coordinate table with all the partners. I think this is where you want to really pay attention to the legal advice you're getting. Right now we're even sorting through a lot of new concepts when it comes to coordination with the DGA at the table. In Maine, the governor's race is going to be the real top of the ticket this year. So you want to make sure you can figure out how to have all your partners at the coordinated table talking about as many issues as possible. It's not as obvious as you might think. And every state has unique coordination rules. So this is one area where you want to talk to your legal advisors right away. The coordinated director sits at the top of the organizational chart. I think it's also key to have whoever's running your field program be standing there with them at the coordinated table. And then we also know each other. I mean, again, this is a small state. Almost everyone at the coordinated table has worked with each other on something else in the past. So we're able to really have the decisions driven by consensus. So turning to our plans, our actual plans for 2014, which are coming together. We hired our coordinated director. It started on October 1st, and we're going to have a draft coordinated plan to shop back around to all of our allies and funders within the next month. In Maine, in 2012, just a quick anecdote, obviously we had the Obama campaign in state helping drive turnout. We also had a successful and well-funded marriage referendum. We were able to partner with them and share a lot of the turnout burden through GOTV, through Election Day. We know in 2014 neither of those entities are around, so we're going to have to shoulder the whole burden statewide with a candidate at the top of the ticket that's going to need attention in a statewide basis. So we're putting in place a field program that really covers every county, multiple offices in every county, in the larger counties. And then we're going to work with our DC partners on the data analysis that Dwight described them doing in state in Washington. We don't really have the capacity to do that, but because we're a targeted state for the DGA, they're going to come in and help with that micro-targeting so we can arrive at target persuasion universe very soon. And then we do the traditional things at the end of the campaign, absentee ballot program, and get out the vote, which I don't think needs much more description right now. I've been going pretty quickly. I assume there haven't been any questions so far. I know no one's just chimed in. So the next question I was asked was, what are the 3 biggest challenges? I think as Dwight pointed out, I would agree that the legal requirements regarding coordination are a huge challenge. You have a combination of federal and state law and different interests from different members of the coordinated table in terms of who they want to play with and who they don't, and what campaigns they really want to focus on and what they don't. So I think getting a clear understanding from your lawyers, both whether it's Neil Reef or your in-state people, and then also with the allied attorneys, they usually have their own firm or in-house counsel to understand how you can coordinate and what you can coordinate. If you get that wrong at the start, you're asking for a lot of trouble very quickly. The other huge challenge is prioritizing what voters we're going to persuade and turn out to vote. We have a lot of crossover voters in Maine. So for instance, this year, Senator Susan Collins is on the ballot. She's likely to get 60 to 65% of the vote. We're going to have to get a lot of Collins voters to vote for our candidate for governor. But then those voters may not vote for a Democrat at the state legislative level. So trying to prioritize and unravel which districts are important and match them up with what's likely to happen at the top of the ticket. That's a huge challenge that I recommend starting to work on right away. Then the other big challenge is as the campaigns grow longer on the calendar, we have a finite universe of volunteers. And trying to do things to keep them engaged, I think it's critical to have enough energy at the end of the campaign to really maximize get out the vote. Next slide. Biggest mistakes. The first one ties into what I started with, and that's leaving, and I think this really only works in a small state as well. It's leaving activists out of the planning process. You don't need to do what they want, but it's very easy to get them invested in your program if they feel like they've been hurt. I'm sure we all have war stories about a volunteer who says, oh, that won't work in my town, or we do it this way, in this county. I never usually agree with that stuff, but I do listen to it, and I think it buys you some goodwill and will allow you to impose more of your plan on people if you hear the activists at the planning stage. Second thing, another thing that should be obvious, keep communicating with your major funders. If they truly are major funders, they have more money, and one of your goals should be to get it. So we go to our large funders and ask for a large amount of money very early in the campaign, but then we show them some accountability. We come back and say, here's how we spent the money, here's how the ideas are going, here's how the persuasion's going, and that leads to more money down the road. So you're going to use your coordinated plan as a fundraising document, but don't stop raising money with it once you get that first check. Go back to them with information and go back to them with more asks down the road. And then this is something, last one is something that our state party got bitten by in the cycle before I became chair, and that is losing oversight of the communications. You know, everything that goes out with your party name on it, you own it, especially if you're the chair or the executive director. No matter who produced it or what third-party group or DC group created it, you're going to own it. So you want to have some check and balance over the content. You may have to fight for it, but I recommend you fight hard for it, that you have some say in what goes out the door with your name on it. And our last question for me was, how does a coordinated figure into plans for 2014? Basically, there are no other plans. You know, we have to have caucuses and we have to have a state convention. But other than that, the whole party operation is folded into the coordinated campaign, and the state party sort of ceases to exist and just becomes the campaign for the rest of the year. So I agree with Dwight and Jackson, who said to fold as much fundraising into the coordinated to support your what I call regular state party efforts. Fold that into all the fundraising for the whole year, so that the only thing that you're really doing is doing this electoral work. All right, well, I'm the rare attorney who doesn't get too long-winded, so I did finish here by 5. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you so
Chairman
much.
Grant, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. That's fantastic. So again, if you have any questions, you can, if you have a computer screen, you can press the little raised hand, or you can type into the little text box there what your question might be, and Jonae can answer that. Jonae, do you have a couple questions for us?
Yes, we do. We have a question from John Zodi. He's also typed this question into the questions box, but we would love to hear your voice, John. So I will go ahead and try to unmute you here. John, are you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, I was just sort of best practices, and I know every state is different, but when are you starting to solicit for your coordinated campaign with fundraising? I mean, is that something you're doing now, or you're going to wait till after the first of the year? There are no elections in Indiana this year, so I'm starting to, head down that path now in some respects. But I'm just curious what sort of timeline you work on.
So if I'm not mistaken, your question is how early do you start on your coordinated campaign fundraising? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ben, do you want to take a crack at that since you're working on that right now?
Sure. We start right now in the fall. Our JJ dinner is coming up, and we're directing that money towards a coordinated campaign. That's sort of the first bunch of money to start to fill that pot. It usually is in conjunction when we start spending. So you heard we hired our coordinated director October 1st. So that's when we need to have some more money coming in, and that's sort of when we shift over to coordinated fundraising.
Yeah. Dwight?
Well, again, we've used that document that I showed you that has the ask for everybody, and course, we want to get them to them as close to January 1st because it's what we want from them for the year. So we have to have our budgeting wrapped up by, first, second week in December. And of course, that meant you had you scored your budget. There's several drafts, right? So I think the process for writing your fundraising plan probably goes from like October 1st to December 1st. When in Ben's case, when they hire on October 1st, that's a very good time to be hiring your coordinator. So got to have your plan by Christmas.
I think it also helps your allies with their budgets too, because they're going through the same process, and they need to know what you're going to be asking them for so that they can present that to their folks as well. So the sooner the better. Jonay, do we have any other questions?
Yes, we do. We have a question here from Don Fisher. Don, I will go ahead and unmute you.
Hey guys, first off, I just wanted to thank Jackson for all of the hard work that he put into making this call happen and putting everything together. My question is for Dwight and Jackson. With the you mentioned that you had transitioned Washington State into making one large ask from your electeds for coordinated buy-in as opposed to a separate state party ask and a coordinated ask. And I was wondering if you had seen any sort of what the transition to trying to sort of make one large ask like that was for your electeds, if you had a little bit of growing pains in there, sort of making that shift. And then also how a large ask like that sort of worked with some of the partner groups, and other organizations that you might be raising money, like how that might affect the scheduling of and the actual budget process a little bit.
Basically, as you build your Democratic Party, you've got to train people. And you have to train your allies, and you have to train your candidates. And it's a new principle. When we first did the Unified Ask, we called it the Unified Ask, all right? And I remember it was we went to the candidates and said, we want $100,000 from you. 85% is going to go to the coordinated, and 15% is going to go to the state party. And we had these two budgets, the state party budget and the coordinated budget, and we could show them these two different budgets, right? And you need that for your own budgeting purposes, right? Your board, in our case, our board passes a state party budget, but the coordinated budget, I don't show to the board because it's just such a moving target. But the first time we did it, we did this sort of said, okay, this is 85-15, and then after that, we never said that again. We just said, this is what the tab is, and no one asked us any questions about it. So, everybody goes through this. You have to train your donors on what you expect from them, and your ability to get that from them is based on their perception of your value to them. So if you're building a tradition of delivering for your candidates and delivering for your partners, then you can build a tradition of asking them for more money in a more predictable fashion.
And Don, let me ask you a question, actually. I had heard some rumors that Oregon and possibly you had created a sheet for tracking contributions or something along those lines. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't believe, I'm not aware of a contribution tracking sheet. We do have a coordinated campaign result spreadsheet that tries to lay out like the number of contacts that we would have per field organizer, per office running the coordinated for a certain amount of time, given with various contact rates, that kind of thing. So we have a results spreadsheet that we've been working on.
I've heard really
together.
Good stuff about that. Could you forward that to me, and then I can have Jonay send it out to everybody on the list as well as a useful tool?
I sure can.
Thanks, Don. Do we have any other questions?
There are no additional questions. We'll give you all just a minute to type in the chat box if you, the questions box if you so choose, or click the raise your hand icon, which is likely much quicker. All right.
Okay.
Seeing no
So I want to thank.
additional questions.
Great. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. I particularly want to thank Chairman Pels and Chairman Grant for their time, and Chairman Buckley, President Buckley, for his words at the beginning of the call. Remember that you are very shortly going to be receiving an email from Jonae, which is going to have some attachments from the presentation today, as well as hopefully the document from Don in Oregon. You will also be asked to fill out a questionnaire or survey related to this conference call. It would be much appreciated if you could do that. It helps us track our numbers and get a better sense of how we can better provide solid, useful conference calls to you on a regular basis. So, and Jonae, I want to thank you so much for all your work in putting this together and bringing us together to continue this important training for state party organizations.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jackson, and thank you to all of you for joining today. We look forward to hearing from you again next week as we have our webinar on digital organizing, where the team from Twitter will join us. So very much looking forward to that, and hope you all will get a chance to register.
Thank you.
Have a great Thursday, everyone.